know to me?
Most common side effects are headache,
Okay.
diarrhea, trouble sleeping, tiredness, and anxiety.
So much goes into who I am. HIV medicine is one part.
So
Ask your doctor about it.
I'm
I'm
still
hearing
Summers.
Katie in the background.
Okay, we are now live on YouTube.
Okay. And who is the presenting agency, DCP or DOT?
DCP.
Okay, DCP.
Actually, it's going to be both of us.
Okay.
So if you would introduce me first, and then we'll go from there.
Most of our committee members know Mr. Branch is done. He's our DOT
Yes,
rep.
hi, Leroy.
Hello.
And we harass him regularly.
That's all right.
And he's always straight and above board with us. So thank you, Leroy and Tom.
No problem. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to be here. For the ones that don't know me, I'm Leroy Branch. I'm the DOT rep from the Brooklyn Borough Commissioner's Office. And I'm happy to be here this evening. And I want to thank all of you, Josephine and Dora, for allowing us to make this presentation of this important program that we're doing here in the city. I want to introduce everybody to Dash Henley, who was our new planner in the Brooklyn Borough Commissioner's Office. And I believe he's going to start off the presentation this evening. Am I correct, Dash?
I think so. And we're also joined by Kate Richard from Department of City
Oh,
Planning.
sorry about that, Kate.
And
Oh, don't worry.
Kate, I think how we've done it before is you're the one who's going to share a screen, and then I'm going and move the slides and I'll present, right? And then I'll turn it over to you.
That sounds good. Sorry, just give me 1 second to pull it up.
Also, I didn't realize we were comparing Severian graduations, but I'm also a Severian graduate, so I hope we have our quota or quorum of graduates on here. Also not 88.
I have to jump in because my brother was a Zavarian graduate.
And my husband, so.
Well, you guys are talking about graduating in '88. To show a little age discrepancy here, I was starting to think about retiring from NYPD in '88.
I had just gotten married in '88 and been married for 1 year in '88, just having my son.
Beautiful. So that was a good year.
I think I was thinking about learning how to walk in 1988. So.
Oh.
And I'm not sure, but I think Steve might be a Severian graduate also.
He is.
Okay, I'm sorry. There are too many conflicts of interest here. Too many issues to deal with.
Right.
And we are.
Okay. So let us begin.
I think Kate is just pulling up. I don't know if Kate is already a host.
Yes, she is. And she's able to share.
Gotcha.
Hi, I'm sorry. My internet chose the most inconvenient moment to.
Conk out.
Sorry about that.
Great. There we go. Everyone else can see it too, right?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. Just 1 second. Okay, cool. Okay, great. So thank you, as Leroy said, for letting us join you tonight to present on this. This presentation is going to be on DOT's Permanent Open Restaurants Program, which we are creating as a result of City Council legislation late last year that makes the program permanent and gives restaurants the options of both sidewalk and roadway seating for outdoor dining. So this program is looking to balance the many needs of the street and sidewalk, keeping restaurants and other users in mind. And the program is taking what we've learned over the past year and a half plus of COVID, as well as our Sidewalk Cafe program pre-COVID when developing the permanent future guidelines. And I just want to make it clear, and I'm doing this at all the community board presentations, that while this presentation will cover both sidewalk and roadway dining, what DOT and city planning are asking the board for tonight is your opinion on the specific sidewalk cafe text amendment. And that is what Kate is going to go into detail later. And Kate, if you can just go forward 2 slides, please. Perfect. So as I'm sure most of you already know, the city had street cafes pre-COVID, but we had far fewer of them. And the majority of the programs were administered by what used to be called the Department of Consumer Affairs and what's now called the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. We did have a small pilot of a public roadway seating, which we called street seats. But that was, I don't think there were any in CB10. There were very few. There were only 25 setups. And our understanding is that the relatively low participation in that program was in large part due to the cost and the lengthy process for it. Next slide, please. So as a result of COVID, we created the Open Restaurants Program. The city suspended existing rules through an emergency executive order, and DOT created a fast and simple way for restaurants to conduct their business in the public right of way. And since the launch a little over a year ago, over 11,000 restaurants have participated, which by estimates are that has helped save 100,000 jobs in the restaurant industry. And that's based on jobs that were lost as soon as COVID hit, and then the rehiring of those jobs by restaurants in response to a couple of efforts, but one of them being this program. And by many accounts, the program has not just been a lifesaver for the restaurant industry, but also the city has seen outdoor dining and the incredible vitality it can bring to our sidewalks and streets as a real beacon of hope and innovation. Otherwise, obviously really dark time in the city, and something that we can look at to do for the future. Next slide, please. And of course, one more slide. Just see.
Is this not?
I think this is the. Yeah, I think these are all your slides now, actually. I'm wondering if this is the wrong PDF.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Just give me
It's
one
okay.
second.
I can try to look for it at the same time.
You think after all these months, we would have a real handle on presenting over Zoom, but still run into issues.
There's
We'll see.
plenty of in-person issues too.
Okay, I think I have the right one, and I really apologize for that. Let me bring that up.
Yeah, I think this is it.
Okay. Are we here?
Okay, cool. And then let's go one more, possibly two. Yes, right here. The one with successes.
Sorry.
Yes, right here. So I was going to say all of that good stuff being said about the, showing the vitality of the city and opportunity for restaurants. We've also seen the positives and negatives in that. And we're trying to take the lessons of those successes and challenges and learn how to make the permanent program better. So on the positive side, we think that the robust use of the program was helped by three things. First, unlike the pre-emergency sidewalk program, no geographies were off limits. So any restaurant with ground floor frontage or sidewalk or roadway space, as long as they met the siting criteria, meaning, you can't interfere with fire hydrant, you can't interfere with crosswalk, you have to provide an 8-foot clearance to meet ADA requirements. All of that, as long as those siting requirements were met, they could participate. And second, the program was free and easy to access, unlike the pre-COVID Sidewalk Cafe program, which required months of multiple reviews by multiple city agencies. So that made it easier for restaurants. And then third, the new element of roadway dining gave restaurants an option that they didn't have before, particularly those that might not have enough room on the sidewalk to accommodate a sidewalk cafe. But we also know that with all the good stuff has come challenges, and that we've learned a lot of lessons from having to create this ad hoc program on an emergency basis. And first, that's the speed of the rollout. We, like I was just saying, we built it from scratch under emergency circumstances, and that led to rules changing, that led to some confusion. And that was obviously frustrating for those involved. And furthermore, throughout the program, we learned that there are a lot of specific challenges with roadway dining and its interaction with other users of the roadway. And we have been making sure that we've been in constant contact with first responders, other city agencies, with issues like that. So for example, FDNY, we have to make sure that, the turning radius at the ends of streets is appropriate. We have to make sure that safety signs aren't blocked. We have to make sure that there's clear demarcation along the sides so they're visible at night and that sort of thing. And the safety is our utmost concern. So that's our top priority when looking at these challenges. And then finally, enforcement has been an issue. We want to create that balance of making sure that restaurants don't feel squeezed, they don't feel overly inspected, don't feel overly fined by the program. But at the same time, we've got to make sure that we're maintaining standards, that these are where they're supposed to be, that the sidewalk isn't being blocked, that nothing is going on, untoward with these locations. So going forward, that's something, another challenge that we're looking to address. Next, please. Yes, so all of that being said, we think that the program has been a massive success, and we're looking to, when looking to change it into the permanent program, it means we have to change a number of different laws that control outdoor dining in non-emergency situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're proposing for the permanent program, and then I'm going to get back to the topic of those legal changes that we need to make it happen. Next, please. And then one more. Okay, cool. So yes, starting with these overall components and some elements of the program, we anticipate that just as in the emergency, DOT will administer a permanent option for both the sidewalk seating and the roadway seating with similar rules to current sidewalk cafes, but that they would be available citywide based on those siting guidelines that I talked about before. Next, please. So when it's final, we really want to make sure that we have specific design guidelines that are very clear and revolve around the principles that balance the use of the sidewalk space both as a spot for people to walk around and through and to use as a restaurant. And notably, the size and scale of the cafes will be defined by the size of the sidewalk itself and the street furniture around it, which I'll get into a little bit next. But one thing we heard is that restaurants really want to have clear guidelines so they know what to build, how to build it. They don't have to change it down the line. Everything is built the way it's supposed to be to meet these standards. So that's something we really want to get right in this program. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, can we go back one more? I think it might have jumped. Oh, no, okay. Let's see. So for most of the city, like I was saying before, the old 8-foot rule will hold, but we're exploring other options in special cases. And we're going to have considerations for areas that have a lot of pedestrian traffic, and vice versa. We might have waivers for those that can't meet the requirement, but might be able to have some sort of setup. Next, please. And right here, we talk about making the program seasonal. We did have a lot of use in the winter, more than I certainly expected. I don't know about others, but I was not interested in sitting outside in January. Others were. But going forward, we think that with all the considerations involved in having a winter setup, that we will be making the program seasonal, so it would not operate in the winter. But just to be clear, temporary versus permanent, I know this gets confusing. We're still in the temporary program right now. The rules for making the permanent program aren't done yet. So restaurants will still be able to operate during the winter through the winter of 2022. So restaurants shouldn't be worried right now about having to change or remove those setups. And finally, we're trying to come up with ideas for helping restaurants that can build structures and then be able to remove them and figure out, where they can store it themselves and then return it when the season comes back. Next, please. Yes. So this is what I was talking about getting into with the rules that would change. So under this program, we would have a streamlined application process. The licenses for these businesses would be 4 years, although there would be an annual review. So that would be an opportunity to look at what's gone right and what's gone wrong, and to be able to pull those if necessary. And separately from this, we would obviously welcome individual feedback and complaints via the community board or via 311 as necessary, of course. Next, please. Okay, so this is where we get into the issues of how to make this permanent. And let me just, I want to get this right, so I do this properly. So in looking to move the legal authority to run the program under just DOT, we need to create new processes for the roadways. So we're looking at streamlining the review process as much as possible, while leaving in place the essential roles of agency and public review. And to make this permanent program a reality, we have to go through these 3 steps. So first, which is the focus for today, is the removal of the locational prohibition through zoning. And that's really key to unlocking the full citywide universe of applicability here and consolidating control and accountability for the program under DOT. And we're also working with the city council to enact appropriate legislation. So like I was saying before, the legislation allowed for the creation of the permanent program. But we need new legislation that would update the laws governing sidewalk cafes and then create a new set of laws and rules to govern cafes, which would be the third part. Next slide, please. So following zoning and legal changes, this is the timeline that I mentioned a little bit before. We anticipate that rulemaking that formalizes many of the program design and application details, and then a formal opening up of the application window for the new program, which will not have gone into effect yet. So that's what I wanted to stress before, is that restaurants and communities should feel some certainty that we're beginning this process of developing the future program, that the current emergency temporary program is expected to be in effect as is for the next year and a half at least. We think that will give restaurants ample time to transition to the new process if they choose to participate in the program in 2023. But changing zoning is the first critical step to making this program permanent. But as you can see on the timeline, there are these multiple steps to developing the full program. And each one of those steps welcomes public input and review. Next slide, please. So we're excited to be able to make this program permanent. We're excited to be able to work on it and work with communities to make sure that it's something that's a great addition to the community, but also doesn't have those negative effects that we spoke of before. And we think that COVID has really reshaped the way that our city thinks about how our streets can be used, which has been somewhat a silver lining in a difficult time. And that's why we're looking to make the most of this program and gather your feedback tonight on it. And like I was saying, the roadway portion of this presentation is very much preliminary. And the primary purpose tonight is to gather feedback on the proposed zoning text amendment specifically on sidewalk cafes. And I'm going to hand it over to Kate so she can go into more specific zoning details on that.
Thank you, Dash, and thank you all for bearing with my technical difficulties. Sanmati is out this week, so I'm happy to be here back with CB10 and fill you in on this portion of the Open Restaurants program. Like Dash said, there's a lot of different pieces, so this is one of them. This is a zoning text amendment that will help facilitate the creation of the new program. So the proposed text amendment would remove a particular section of the zoning, Chapter 1, Article 4. It would remove it entirely. And this is the section that currently has regulations for sidewalk cafes. Related parts of the zoning resolution in text that relates to special districts would also be removed. Some special districts have additional zoning text about sidewalk cafes. And so the effect of this is basically zoning is no longer a part of how we determine the location of cafes, and it would allow restaurants to apply to DOT to be a part of this program if they can meet the required criteria rather than going through a process with the zoning. So like Dash said, sidewalk cafes have been a part of our streets for quite a while. And until COVID, we had rules determining where these cafes could be. And in zoning, specific definitions for 3 types of cafes that were allowed, all of which had their own criteria that had to be met. We had unenclosed sidewalk cafes, small unenclosed cafes, and enclosed cafes. You can see the different criteria for all of them below the photos. And zoning has also, like I said, determined where in the city these cafes are allowed. So here we can see citywide what those regulations were. And I'll have a zoomed in map of CB10 in a few more slides. So here we see the yellow lines pretty much all in Manhattan. Those show where small cafes only are allowed. The purple lines show where unenclosed cafes and small cafes are allowed. And the green lines show where all three types are allowed. And then you can also see, importantly, in red and in blue, the areas where no cafes were permitted, blue because it's residential areas of the city, and red areas were specifically prohibited for other reasons. So in response to the pandemic, non-essential businesses were closed beginning in March 2020, which, as we all know, had a really major impact on a lot of businesses, a lot of industries in New York City, and the restaurant industry was certainly one of them that was hit very hard. From the first to second quarter in 2020, employment in the restaurant industry dropped 64%. And even now that some of the restrictions have lifted and indoor dining is permitted, we know, probably all know of establishments in our neighborhoods and our communities that have gone out of business. But to help support the restaurant industry and try and keep some of these key places afloat during the pandemic, New York City launched the Open Restaurants program. About 11,500 restaurants participated, and around half of those were outside of Manhattan. And 10,000 of these restaurants used the sidewalk as part of their space. City Hall estimates that around 100,000 jobs were saved as part of this emergency program if restaurants hadn't been allowed to move outdoors. So each dot on this map represents a restaurant participating in the emergency program that otherwise wouldn't have been permitted by the zoning rules that we have today. And you can see the color of those dots is the reason why they wouldn't have been allowed. So red, specific prohibitions, special districts, some high traffic areas, things like that. Yellow, limited by the regulations for small cafes, and then blue, restaurants in residential districts. Because residential zoning does not permit restaurants, but there are many restaurants that predate the zoning, those are allowed to continue operating. And so we estimate that over 2,500 restaurants participating in the outdoor dining program would have been unable to do so under our zoning. So in addition to removing the part of the zoning that regulates sidewalk cafes so that can move over to the permanent program, we're also doing some other sort of technical cleanups, making sure that all definitions are consistent and any other references in other parts of the text to sidewalk cafes are updated, removing text that precludes operable windows for outdoor restaurants, removing provisions about enclosure structures in some text, and clarifying sidewalk widening text to ensure there's no restaurant or no conflicts with the new Open Restaurants program. So now we can zoom into CB10 and we can see the current zoning regulations for sidewalk cafes. So what is in place today? Much of the district is residential zoning districts, so sidewalk cafes are currently not allowed in those areas, and those are shown here in blue. And then the green shows places where sidewalk cafes are allowed, and that's 3rd Avenue, 5th Avenue, part of 4th Avenue, 13th Avenue, so more commercial corridors. And then up near the border with Community District 12, and that's an area that's zoned manufacturing, so they allow commercial uses like restaurants. And we can also see the sidewalk cafes that existed before this emergency program. As of 2019, there were 14 cafes in CB10. 4 of those were enclosed and 10 were unenclosed. And now we can see these are the restaurants that participated in the Open Restaurants program. So 175 total. 66 were on the sidewalk, 13 were in roadway, and 96 were using some combination of both roadway space and sidewalk space. And so here we have the timeline again that Dash showed with a little note about the referral period to the community boards and borough presidents, which is where we are now. It's been referred out to all 59 community boards, all 5 borough presidents, and we're really eager to get your feedback, get your recommendations, try and answer questions as best we can. And that's this presentation. So yeah, we can try and answer your questions now. And if you have maps that you want to see again, I'm happy to pull those back up on screen if you'd like.
Committee, I welcome your comments, because I'm going to have a lot later on.
Yeah, I do. Steve,
I know.
okay. I'm a little bit confused by the whole presentation. It says, I believe that it was the young lady that just spoke, forgive me, Kate, who
DCP.
said that this is going to help facilitate creation of the program. It seems to me like we already have established that there's going to be a program, all right? And we're putting the cart before the horse. Shouldn't you have come to us to find out if something along this nature should be created at all, rather than going through all the work of creating something and just asking us to rubber stamp it?
Like I said, we really do value your feedback, and this is an important part of the public review process. It has been pretty quick, and I apologize that we haven't been able to be out here earlier with more meetings, more conversations about the program. Because a lot of it is based on this existing emergency program and making improvements and refinements to that. I think that has helped speed the process along, and it's not necessarily starting from scratch, it's building on what we have.
But isn't it really true that this is building on an emergency program? In other words, I didn't see here any clamor for this prior to the emergency program. And it seems to me that what we're doing is bootstrapping to do something that somebody wants to get done, okay, and wanted to get done beforehand. And I think that's totally inappropriate. Now, I know you're doing a great job, and I'm serious, it's not you, but I have a real problem with coming into a community, all right, saying, we have now done this. I mean, there's 1,000 questions I have. I have no idea why you concentrate and you say, we've saved all these. I mean, many stores went out of business. How come all of them aren't allowed to put their wares outside too? All right, what about the neighbors, okay, who have lived in these communities and are now going to have their values decrease as a result of it? I mean, there's 1,000 different questions here that have not been addressed. And I really think that the whole thing should be scrapped, and it should go back to, at least go back to the drawing board to find out if the communities really want this kind of a thing. All right, this was something created in an emergency, made the place not look like New York. It certainly doesn't look like Paris. All right, I'm not quite understanding what was wrong with what we had prior to this. One more thing. One more thing. What happens to, are they paying for this? I mean, this is public property. Are they paying? In other words, anybody can do this just by asking, correct? And there's no fees connected?
I believe there will be a fee in the.
How much of a fee?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well, that's very important, because are we going to lose the fact that people are now paying? I mean, before, and tell me if I'm wrong, Doris, Joe, that in order to, previously you had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars in order to get one of these, and all that money went to the city. Now what happens? People are using sidewalks and streets that I'm paying for and you're paying for, and and to support the restaurant business. I mean, I support them all the time. I go to them all the time, but I don't understand this giveaway program that we're putting together here, which is what it basically is. I mean, there may be some insignificant fee that they pay for whatever, a filing fee or something like that. But it seems to me that each one of them can just go out there, that the neighbors have absolutely no input on this whatsoever. This is a turkey.
Well said. But, I think it's important because we are creating a whole new structure within the DOT, which is the DOT is now responsible for monitoring and enforcing this. And there is no mechanism to fund this. And so that's counterintuitive. That and I've got a lot more things to say, but I'll let other people on the committee speak to it.
can I have a question? I have a couple questions.
Oh,
Is
please.
that okay, Doris?
You're the wizard at,
Yeah, so, you know, in preparing for today's meeting, I put together kind of a look back at the Sidewalk Cafes, focusing on the text amendment portion of this. And, you know, in Community Board 10, my statistics are a little bit off from Kate's that she provided tonight, but kind of similarly. Whenever we had a Sidewalk Cafe application presented before the Zoning and Land Use Committee, we never had not one time did we ever deny an application for a Sidewalk Cafe, but it did provide an opportunity for us to meet with the business owners and have neighbors and residents come. And I understand, you know, during the pandemic, it really was a lifesaver for many of our businesses. But speaking to the text changes first that are on the table that we're looking at today, and realizing that, you know, many people have opinions about it, but the text changes are very specific. And at one time, planners in New York City believed that prohibiting sidewalk cafes in certain sections of the city, there was a reason for it, and that's why they were included in the text. And that's residential communities, that's below elevated structures, within commercial uses within residential districts. And all of that now is going to change. And I think that's a big change. So I wanted to get from just an understanding from the Department of City Planning on what was examined. Was there an environmental review? I mean, you know, we don't have an elevated subway in Board 10, but our neighboring Board 11 does. And I shop along the elevated structure, and there were always things falling from, you know, above the head. And within Community Board 10, I have to say that most of our complaints about, you know, relating to the emergency new structures out there have been those that impede in the residential districts. And there's a really, you know, we have many new structures, and we have only a handful of bad actors, but those residents and community members that live alongside those areas with bad actors have completely destroyed their quality of life. So as we review this from a community perspective and being here in the district office, I want to get an understanding from the Department of City Planning as to the sections that are now completely removed from the text, which means that the tool with enforcement from the Department of Buildings will forever be removed. How closely was that studied? And can you share a little bit more information about the processes that went into Department of City Planning looking at removing those sections from the text, and what future implications have you talked about as an agency that you can share perhaps with us, so as a zoning committee we can have a better understanding of?
Sure. There was an environmental review done. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm very sorry. I don't have I think, most technical answers to your questions, but I would be happy to share it with you and answer questions from committee members, board members after they've had a chance to look at it. Sorry, there are a lot of parts of that question. I'm trying to. Your question about residential areas. So while this does mean that existing restaurants in residential zoning districts will be able to participate in outdoor dining, in the outdoor dining program, it does not allow new restaurants in residential districts where they're no longer, or where they are not already allowed. So just because an existing restaurant in a residential district could apply to be a part of this program, there couldn't be a new restaurant that opens up where it's not allowed and start participating.
Okay, and within the higher C districts, where I believe in our district, I was a little confused because we've never had a sidewalk cafe within the C8 district, because my understanding was it was not permitted within our C8 district. So that was a question that I thought perhaps I just wanted to make sure, is that true? Is that not true?
I can double check the text and get back to you, but a C8 district is sort of it's,
Commercial only, right?
excuse me, I'm sorry?
A commercial only use
It's-
district?
Yes, and it's for very high intensity commercial activities, more of the light industrial, light manufacturing. So not as much geared towards like retail and neighborhood restaurants and shops, more auto mechanics, things like that.
Yeah, I'd
But
appreciate
I
that.
will double check the specific text.
Okay. Doris, I don't want to
Yeah.
monopolize the,
Okay, I have a few questions.
Laura, I'm sorry, you had some board members too also.
Okay, board member, please.
And our chair.
Yes, I'm technically not on this committee, but I guess by default I am.
Well, you're on the committee.
Okay, so I do agree with many of Steve's sentiments as to the process by which this came before us. I do not envy Kate or Leroy's job at the moment because I believe that they have been tasked with such a gargantuan endeavor on such a short timeline. And I am, from having, to the best of my ability, having listened to as much as I possibly can on this zoning, proposed zoning text amendment. I have seen and really tried to familiarize myself with this. I have seen that, I mean, this is a huge undertaking, under which you're struggling. And I understand that the issue before us today is to vote on a zoning text amendment and to try to get, your feedback on that. This will go before a full board. We'll try to get you the feedback that you want. But it is so difficult. In your presentation, and I'm going to completely ignore the part of the presentation that deals with, the ideas behind the reasons for implementing this and the concerns about restaurants and everything like that, because it seems that, everyone's just moved beyond that, whether or not, it's definitely a laudable goal. I don't know that just, achieving the goal is done by any means necessary. I see this as a very big burden on the neighboring establishments. These are things that, yes, there are many restaurants. There are also neighboring businesses which are being eclipsed. Their businesses are being harmed by the fact that their storefront visibility. And if you talk to, people pay for a retail space for that purpose so that they can be on the ground floor and for the visibility. That is, they're being charged prime for that. They're being eclipsed by structures that are built out on the sidewalk. They're being eclipsed. Their foot traffic is being disturbed by loitering restaurant patrons. So I'm very concerned about how this affects other businesses. We want everyone to benefit, right? So I'm very concerned about that, but I'm going off on a bit on a tangent. I'm going to try to stick to the zoning issues. So one of the things that you mentioned was that the existing establishments that have their structures built out into the street and are using the sidewalk can be grandfathered. I am very concerned with that because I feel that, these things went up with very hastily, with very little regulation, with virtually no thought as to their placement, no thought as to, the environmental impacts. And when we say environmental, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, that can be traffic, that can be sanitation, that can be impact on the quality of life of local residents. Environmental means everything in the environment. We're not talking just about, grass and trees. So, what I have seen here is that on the existing structures, they've been put up in places that really affect, and this is, DOT's wheelhouse historically, traffic. Typical traffic patterns, pedestrian safety. This is like, we've been here, Leroy, we talk about, traffic mitigation measures. We'll talk about a projection into the street of a couple of feet to allow for pedestrian safety. We're bumping out into the street. across the city on such a gigantic scale that traffic is being impacted. I mean, I know in our district, traffic has been impacted grossly. And this is at a time when we're talking about, on the other hand, right, we want vision zero. We don't want traffic incidents. We don't want pedestrian incidents. Bicycles have nowhere to go in the street. Cars passing each other, delivery trucks. This has such a huge impact on traffic. Leroy, I'm sure you know all about it. I mean, now we get into the issue of sanitation. Where does the garbage go? I see it being put out in the street beyond the sidewalk structure, right? Sanitation is a hard enough problem. Listen, this is such a gargantuan plan. It involves, I know that DOT is being tasked with all of this to bring it under the one umbrella. Let's face it, it requires huge interagency response. We need sanitation, we need police for enforcement. We still need Department of Buildings because there are safety issues here. There are utilities and services being brought out to these structures. I mean, this is huge. This timeline is completely unrealistic. We have asked for extensions. I know we're not getting them. I am sorry to go on for so long, but the amount of concerns that this brings to mind, it's unbelievable. I'm not a naysayer. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen, but it's got to happen. For more consideration. This timeline is absolutely undoable. It really is. And I think you guys know it. And I feel so bad for you and what you've been tasked with. And I see you under pressure all the time fielding these questions. I know you can't speak freely all the time, but I'm sorry. Okay, I'm a chair and I'm supposed to be neutral all the time, and I do my level best to do that, but I can't do it anymore. I feel it's my civic duty. I've got to say something. This is crazy. We need
Yes.
time. We need more resources. The city right now is so taxed in its resources that, I mean, we don't have the funding, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the resources. COVID has had a terrible effect on the city. This is a great plan. We can't afford it right now. We can't do it right now with the resources that we have. What about SLA? What about liquor service? What about Department of Sanitation? Violations, who's issuing them? Who's enforcing them? Used to be, could be ECB, DOT, could be FDNY, right? We have fire department concerns here. I mean, just basic pedestrian street safety, throwing in a footnote. Where do you walk your dog, right? I'm getting yelled at by people on the street because my dog is going somewhere near their sidewalk shed. Where am I supposed to take the poor dog? Anyway, this is so big. This is such a huge project. And quite frankly, I think we're not hearing as much feedback from the members of this committee because we don't even know where to start. So I'm just going to circle back to a couple of my questions that are specifically directed to your specific comments about grandfathering in existing establishments. How's that going to work? It was pretty much the Wild West when they were put out there. So how do you grandfather that in? And what if they don't comply with the laws that you now develop later on? Do they get to stay just because they were there to start?
That's a great question. And I appreciate all of your other comments. I'm taking notes on everything you're saying and that the others have said. To address that question, grandfathered in the sense that they are permitted to operate as restaurants in a residential district that have access to other programs that restaurants in other districts do have. The structures themselves are not being grandfathered in. I believe restaurants will have to apply, and maybe Dash and Leroy can speak more to that, but the actual structures and setups that restaurants have now are not grandfathered into the permanent program. And one big difference, which I hope speaks to your question about neighboring businesses and foot traffic, we've all seen tons of restaurants that have tables going into the area in front of other stores, roadway in front of other stores. In the permanent program, they'll be restricted to the area right in front of their business, their building. So that does help with some of access to the other businesses on the street. I know that doesn't answer all your questions, address all your issues.
No, it doesn't answer my question, but truthfully, I don't really know that that addresses the neighboring store owner's concern that, you know, they've got these projections coming out on either side, especially for our really small mom and pop places that don't have a lot of square footage. So they've got a little storefront and now it's virtually not visible. But I get what you're saying. So on the zoning issue, you're basically saying if there was a restaurant that was grandfathered into what is the current zoning, that grandfather will continue into the new zoning, not necessarily their sidewalk structure.
That's right.
Or their street structure. Okay, thank you. I had another question, license, 4 years. I have to say, 4 years is a long time. I know when we have restaurant licenses with SLA, you know, liquor licenses, 4 years is a long time. It doesn't give any time for review, and whether or not we'll even have that, I don't know. You know, but when we do have, as Josephine said, a bad actor, you know, someone who's not complying, 4 years is a long cycle, right? To live through that before, because in truth, the only time, like, you know, anybody ever catches up with them is when the license is up for review and they say, hey, by the way, for the past 4 years, you know, you've been disturbing the whole neighborhood or whatever the case may be. So I think that that's a very long cycle. You know, about the fees, I'm sure there's going to be fees. Come on. You know, we can't do this for free. It's the city, you know, we need to make money. You know, what that'll be, I don't know. And if they're that high, you know, will their numbers offset? You know, yes, the previous Sidewalk Cafe was very expensive, but when you've got, you know, the great multitude that we'll have now of not sidewalk cafes, but outdoor dining, you can lower the fee because the numbers are probably going to be higher just based on the number of places that apply. The restaurants will start applying for permits you're expecting in 2022. So in the meanwhile, we kind of have what we have going on now until then, like this sort of, you know, it's kind of been put up. I'll tell you, you know, even without bad actors, right? It's not their fault, the restaurant's fault that this has gone up with very little guidance. I mean, even restaurants have said, we don't really have guidance. Like, we're putting these things up, you know, we're not really sure what's going on. And you can't blame them for doing it because, hey, they need to live and provide for their families. And we love restaurants. I love to eat. I love to go out. Everybody does. But the speed at which it's occurred, and the fact that we're now having the existing situation continue into 2022 concerns me. We've got, you know, the winter coming and snow. We've got structures that will fall into disrepair. Most of them are new now. They look great. That's not going to be the case forever. You know, again, sanitation. So that's something I'd like to respond to. Yes, COVID reshaped the way we see the way the streets can, you know, the way we've seen streets be used. Nobody was outside. Nobody was out. Of course you could use streets when nobody's out. Everybody was in their homes. Everyone's coming out now. It's getting very congested, very dangerous, very dangerous. Even on the sidewalks, there's trip hazards. There's traffic going back and forth from the bustling restaurant to the tables that are out on the street, plowing, you know, I mean, it's hard to walk by at times when you've got a stretch where there's a number of restaurants all in a row. So just general pedestrian traffic is heavily impeded at points. I do think that there needs to be a limit on how many restaurants you can have right next to each other, having these structures in order to, you know, reduce congestion, possibly, just throwing it out there. Where can't a sidewalk cafe be is my question now. So I've taken off the restriction. Where can't it be? Just, can we have it in the negative instead of the positive? Because I'm confused.
Sure. So just a few things, and Kate can add to this. It's, you know, it can't be in what we call the street amenity zone, which is the area adjacent to the curb that typically has utilities or access or that sort of thing, or
I don't understand what that means. I'm sorry. Can you clarify?
Sure. Fire hydrants, utility access, anything that's usually curbside or benches, that sort of thing. So it can interfere with those, or tree pits is another one. It also can't interfere with that same clearance that I talked about before of having that 8-foot clearance for accessibility rules that would preclude that.
But you did mention that that can be reduced under certain circumstances. I caught a little snippet of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
What was
looking
that about?
we're looking at that in certain instances where it's not a typical sidewalk or street. I don't have any examples of that. I can't think of any.
How do you
Yeah.
envision, I know this is all, look, I know you've got a ton of things to work through.
No, it's okay.
So would that be handled the way maybe a variance would have been handled in the past? Is there a review? Is there, how are you envisioning, if at all, that working?
I don't think that we've really gotten to that point of it with the roadway dining portion. I don't know if Kate has updated information on that, but that's something that we're looking at as part of the permanent program to come later. So I don't have details on that part now.
Okay.
Could I add?
But again, so where can't it be in terms of zoning? So I've got like, okay, and where, you're basically pointing out certain parts of a sidewalk, to my mind, where these things can't be. In terms of zoning,
Yes.
That's definitely a Kate question.
sorry, hi, Kate.
Where a restaurant is not permitted, a district that does not allow restaurants, you can't have a sidewalk cafe because you can't have a restaurant. The way we treat any non-complying use, that anything that's not allowed today, but it was there before the zoning, the way we treat that for all uses in the zoning text is they're allowed to continue. If they stop continuing for a period of 2 years, then the business, the building use, whatever it is, has to revert to what is allowed now. So restaurants that already exist and that that predate not just the open restaurants program, but the zoning that allowed or didn't allow them to be in a particular place, they do have access to the program. Any restaurant has access to the program. You can't put a restaurant where one is not allowed, newly established, and participate in this program.
Could you
Okay, so
clarify what you said about they can operate for 2 years? If they're not
that's-
allowed to operate, but they can operate for 2 years if they're operating?
Sorry, very technical, jargony, confusing zoning point. So for any use that, whether it's a restaurant or if you had like a mechanic in a residential district that predates the zoning, would not be allowed to open up shop there today, but because it was before the zoning, they're allowed to continue. If that business stops operating for 2 years, then when it comes back, whether it's the same owner, a new owner, it has to be a business that is allowed under the current zoning. So they're not grandfathered in anymore if there's a 2-year break in the operation of whatever is on that site. Does that make more sense?
I would like to have that clarification in writing, please.
I can send you the zoning
Thank
section.
So
Okay,
Kate, if
and while
not-
I'm monopolizing here, one more quick question. Where does this leave us with enclosed sidewalk cafes? So we used to have places where we could have them. Now we don't, now that's all, that will be all out the window. So what happens with them? Where are they allowed? Or can anyone put up an enclosed sidewalk cafe? Because that really is an extension, of the actual restaurant premises in an enclosure, which doesn't seem to be what's permitted by open restaurants. So if you could clarify, that would help.
Yeah, fully enclosed cafes won't be allowed in the permanent program, and there will be design requirements and a lot of criteria that's still being worked out as to what these spaces can actually look like, but a fully enclosed structure won't be permitted in the future.
It won't be permitted.
Will not, right?
So enclosed sidewalk cafes just are a thing of the past.
Enclosed sidewalk cafes that had a license in 2020 will be allowed to continue, but going forward, no new enclosed sidewalk cafes.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Stephanie.
I have a couple of comments, is Dean speaking. From what I understand, whatever authority the community boards have is either eliminated or reduced drastically. And in terms of restaurants and people coming before the community board, we're probably with one agency where people feel comfortable that they call and they get some kind of a response. And this is not a negative statement about any other agency. It's just that we're more localized, so we could focus on it localized. So one thing that I think administratively it might add a little bit, but I think operationally it would be better for everybody is if community boards were left in the process, even if it was just, coming for the community board, making a presentation on what you wanted to do. I think that would help. I don't know that that's ever going to happen, but I think that would definitely help the program overall. One of the things that I do like about this program, it kind of levels the playing field between the big restaurants and the small restaurants. Because right now, if you look, who's that on the sidewalk? It's primarily your larger restaurants, even the ones in the street. It's primarily your larger restaurants. The small guy that has a 20-foot frontage, many of them aren't even participating in that. So I think with this reduction in paperwork, however you want to put it, reduction in zoning, it will kind of level the playing field a little bit for the little guy. Thank you.
Stephanie, I know you wanted to speak before. You still?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, actually, it sort of piggybacks on what Dean was saying. I think I heard a few times the statement that public review stays in place. Can that be clarified, please? Because I'm not understanding what happens when the emergency program ends. Do the existing ad hoc structures have to go through a review, or do those restaurants, do they appear before community board as they've done in the past to ask permission for or to gain approval for these sidewalk structures?
So I'll take that, and I think Kate, you might want to add to it as well. So for the sidewalk portion of it, we're not proposing, like Kate was saying, to change community board review for those at this time, because that is charter mandated. So changing that would require a charter change. For the roadway program itself, it's a brand new program, and we're going to have that different process that I was talking about, and we don't expect to include community board review of individual roadway applications. That being said, the current structures that are there now that you were saying for the temporary program would have to be reevaluated by us for the permanent program, because we're going to have those new guidelines, both in terms of design and safety and all of that we haven't fully fleshed out now. So the restaurants that are there now won't necessarily be complying with those because they don't exist yet. So that's why we want to create the program and have enough time to get that information out there for restaurants to be able to comply, or if they choose to not participate in the program when it becomes permanent in 2023, that they can remove their structures then. So there will be a transition.
Okay, so just to be clear then, the public review process stays in place for the sidewalk cafes, but when moving forward, when you're considering the roadway cafes, no public review, no.
That's terrible.
That
is awful. That is just terrible.
Agreed.
I just want to clarify, and
Public space, no public review is just, I'm shocked.
Giving it
Anyway.
away, and wow.
Robert?
Oh, you.
Sorry, did I cut you off, Stephanie? I'll get back to you. Robert.
Just 2 points. In the beginning slide that we saw, it talked about a weakness of this program, there being a lack of clarity, a lack of consistency, and a lack of communication. And while I appreciate the presentation that was offered tonight, I still don't feel comfortable or good. And I leave this with even more lack of clarity, more inconsistency, and communication that doesn't bring us forward, I think, in a better way for the community. So, agreeing with what other members of the committee are speaking of, one of the things that I'd be interested in knowing, while our focus is Community Board 10, I doubt we are the first community board that is bringing this up. And if this plan is going to be rolled out throughout the city, are the other community boards saying the same things? Is this going to And is there enough consensus amongst the community boards for this to at least slow down, change, or offer more feedback from the community? I'd like to get a better sense of that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ash. Go ahead.
So I was just gonna say that what I was referring to in terms of that was the evolution of the rules in the program and restaurants having an understandably tough time and wanting to keep up with it. And I know when we talk about bad actors, I don't want to make it sound like they're villains. Like as someone else was saying, you know, I think most of the restaurants are trying to do the right thing and trying to have rules that make sense and that they can follow and not worry about any confusion there. So that was the issue with the evolution of those and wanting to get those down pat for the permanent program. In terms of the other community boards, there's definitely been a lot of different feedback on similar issues of access, of review of bad actors, of sanitation, and those concerns. So there has been some similarity there. And then the same questions of the same aspects of wanting to support restaurants and wanting to make it the process easy for them as long as they're abiding by the guidelines. And then Kate, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure, I wanted to clarify a point from a couple speakers before. Roadway cafes are still subject to public hearings. It's just right now in the city charter, they're under like a different category of public review, similar to what we do for bus shelters. So they'll have public hearings. It's not a community board referral the way it is with sidewalk cafes, but there still is a public hearing for those. And I just put a link in the chat. I hope it went to everyone. This is the project page for open restaurants, and you can see what other community boards have voted. You can see whether they voted with recommendations, a straight yes or no. As we get those votes in, and we're sort of in the beginning of getting recommendations from boards, but they will be here. And this is one way to see how other boards at least are voting, if not their specific comments and feedback.
And we're definitely, Robert, to your other point, is this is definitely part of the process of gathering all this feedback and seeing, you know, what comes up most, seeing not just what Kate was saying from the other community boards, but the other link that we have with the survey that the general public can fill out, and we can put that in the chat as well and send to you to send out to your mailing lists and other folks in the community to gather that feedback as well.
The link that I posted also has the environmental review documents. So those are public and available for anyone. It's under public documents. And then if you click on that.
Is that one of those 100 and something pages to read that's so much fun?
Yes, it's quite long.
Could you send us an executive summary?
I can't right now. I'm sorry. I am happy to.
Not today, but could you send us an executive summary?
Sure. Happy to do that.
Let me add something. In terms of restaurants, it seems to me those on the corner are really benefiting, whereas restaurants in mid-block can't take advantage of this provision. And often restaurants on the corner are those that allow valet parking. So the person puts their car outside of the restaurant, which is in the roadway, that's blocking the traffic. And then other fellows driving want to make turns. It's very difficult. You're in a restaurant or you're walking in the street and the waiter is bringing the food from the restaurant to the cafe, and you're being interrupted as you're walking in the street with platters of food. I mean, it seems to me that the sidewalks are now not the sidewalks for the people, they're sidewalks for the restaurants. The whole thing is out of sight.
Thank you, Barbara. That's a very important comment. Because what I noticed in all of your slides is you don't show pedestrians or traffic. We are a pedestrian-oriented community. our sidewalks are crowded, and I don't see any appreciation for the role of pedestrians on sidewalks. One of the slides that they had in the June presentation showed probably a 2-foot passage. A wheelchair couldn't get by, a mother with a stroller couldn't get by. There is no respect for the pedestrians using the sidewalks.
And I point out that the sidewalks were created for pedestrians, not for restaurants. Okay, and now we're just flipping it on its ear.
Yes,
And I would like to add, there are many, what I've noticed is, I was thinking of it when Dora said, mothers with strollers, in order to get, the electricity out to the sheds, what they're doing is they're putting the wires across the pavement and adding, either something over it. Sometimes it's electrical tape. Sometimes they actually have, a plastic bump up. It's creating a trip hazard and also, an obstacle for, things like strollers, wheelchairs, things with wheels for them to roll over. So, how the utilities are going to get out to these sheds. I know there were some preliminary guidelines from DOB, but, this is another item that is of concern. And I will note on the slides, yes, it was glaring how all of them have this, there's no one walking, there's completely unobstructed between where the tables are.
Do you know how many buses are on the streets?
And that's not how life goes, like it's just when there's people out in the streets, we want people out in the streets going to the restaurants. It's unrealistic.
No, so
I
think we are, you are not looking at the importance of the streets to residential communities. I also think you're asking us to take the zoning text, eliminate a certain portion, and not telling us what the new guidelines are. It's like, throw this out, we'll tell you what we're going to give you someday. And that's not acceptable.
Has anyone been on?
It is very difficult.
And I'm sorry. Has anyone been on the Fifth Avenue bus in the morning? As the bus is trying to go down the avenue, trucks are making deliveries, but they can't get close to the sidewalks. It's pandemonium.
And I want to reinforce something that Barbara Germack said. There's a restaurant at an intersection that is a dangerous intersection. There have been serious accidents. There's been a death. And that restaurant has taken over the sidewalk, and they use a lane of traffic for valet parking.
Right.
So access to the Belt Parkway is limited to one lane of traffic, and 3 buses utilize that avenue, and it is extremely dangerous. The DOT, because of the concerns about the area, put up bollards. The bollards are replaced every 3 months. I live here. I know what happens, Leroy. I'm keeping track. Are you? So I think there are a lot of serious sidewalk issues, traffic issues that you're looking at universally, and you're not looking at the impact in residential communities. And I think you're asking us to make comments on a concept, not anything specific. And I think that's unconscionable.
I'd like to also add, we should all speak to merchants who are not restaurant owners. I've spoken to a number of them. 2 merchants very clearly, almost emphatically said to me that the restaurants, the way they're operating now, have had a negative impact on their business. Now, that's also taking into consideration the street structures, but they're very emphatic that it's had a negative impact on their business. So we're looking at one segment of the retail community, but not the whole retail community. And that's what happens when we have a mayor that wants to push a specific program like this.
And I just want to, we have a former board member who used to say the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And you're proposing open restaurants on 3rd Avenue in Bay Ridge. Does the DOT know that 3rd Avenue is proposed as a truck route and what impact trucks will have on 3rd Avenue and the open restaurants?
Yes, so that's something I want to bring up because it also goes back to what Barbara was talking about with trucks making deliveries and loading zones. And that's something that we are talking with our freight team about, is looking at balancing all of those needs in the street. And it's not easy. Lori, like you were saying, it's not necessarily enviable position to be dealing with all of those at once, the competing uses of the street, of buses, of deliveries, of cars, of bikes, of pedestrians crossing. But definitely that is something we need to keep on top of trying
But
to
how can
balance.
we proceed without knowing your conclusions?
I
How
mean,
can we
so
proceed on this?
right. Well, tonight, the roadway portion of this again is very much preliminary, and that's not something that us or DCP are asking right now for a vote on for changes with that. So the focus of the vote is definitely on the sidewalk cafe portion of it.
But Dash, will community boards have the opportunity to even comment on the new rules? Truly comment?
I don't know
And
how that
communities?
process is going to work
Right.
out in the end.
Because we weren't consulted in any portion of this. I know there were entities that were, but community boards were not. And I think when you speak about the public right of way and public land, I think it's important to engage the community. I mean, we're advisory, right? But the community needs an opportunity to certainly have a say. And we hear it at the board, and maybe not so much for this committee, but our police and public safety committee that reviews SLA, applications. And again, we have a handful of bad actors. And, there are disruptions. And when you have no enforcement and you have no teeth and you have rules that don't encompass all of this, you have the wild, we used to say the Wild West, but I now say the wild North, South, East, and West. Because, we have retail establishments that want to be out on the street, that are out on the street without impunity because there is no enforcement. There is no DCWP that has enforcement agents yet. General vending, we have vendors that have sidewalk cafes out there and there's no vendor enforcement. So, there's more sidewalk obstructions, and all these layers just continue to create, issues in certain parts of the district and communities that feel that they're voiceless because their quality of life, their investment in our community has been directly impacted. And it's very frustrating to be here to know that a new program is going to be put out there without our input, and communities won't have a say on public land. And we're looking at a major change to our zoning resolution. I think it's going to be very difficult to sort through. I'm sorry, Doris, I know that there's two other members, and Amanda Zantano from the bid.
I have one more comment. And so you're saying that enforcement of all regulations for street cafes, for road usage, will now be DOT.
In terms of the setups for roadway dining,
roadway dining.
and sidewalk cafes, yes. So we're
Roadway
not.
dining will all be DOT.
Right. And two things I just wanted to clarify is we're not proposing changing enforcement for issues that are adjacent to it, but not necessarily related. So what I mean by that is, NYPD is the enforcer for if you have someone in a car in the roadway where they shouldn't be, DOT cannot enforce that. That's NYPD. I think everyone knows that.
We're just so let me clarify.
Wait, I don't know. Have you defined already what DOT will be regulating, how they will do it, and how they will be funded?
We haven't. No, that hasn't been decided yet, Doris. But to answer your original question, all the enforcement that's taking place today, and the agencies that enforce it, like noise, I know that's one of the ones that you're going to be talking about, will still fall under NYPD. Okay, the enforcement for us would be the actual structures, the actual rules and regulations that govern those structures, but everything else, sanitation, noise, all of that will still go under the same agencies that they go under today.
That shouldn't be.
We're not enforcing anything. We'll still.
They're not enforcing.
I'm just explaining.
I would love to show you, Leroy. I mean, we have
you
one.
Have to show me. I know.
One establishment has 217 noise complaints.
Right.
I could share my screen and show you from what people's windows with crying children are dealing with. And unless DOT has, or there's enforcement that can revoke these permits, you're going to have the Wild West, because the reality is when someone calls 311 for an amplified sound from a DOT permitted storefront, that complaint is closed within seconds. Okay? The police, when they do go out, will lower the music for 5 minutes. I have 2 cars on a midnight, two cars. That's all I got. And the likelihood of the police department responding to a noise complaint, and that leaves, and again, a handful of bad actors. I have a handful. But nonetheless, in those areas, I have people at my doorstep in tears. So if there's no teeth with that enforcement, and we're going to have roadway units with amplified sound, you know, I just don't know what to say. I mean, if DOT is going to take this on, they need to take the enforcement on. And that includes amplified sound. That includes, you know, noise complaints. It includes the gamut. And there has to be, and again, we don't even know what we're doing. We're not going to have the opportunity to even say this. So I'm saying it now because this may be my only chance to just say it. DOT has to be the enforcer of all. Right. Commissioner Gutman said on the at Department of City Planning, he said, I hand my card out and people call me about the noise. And, you know, well, we're still working on it. And this DEP or the police department. No, if you're going to do this, it has to be DOT. Has to enforce it all. You know, if you want to take this, you have to own it. And all the responsibilities that go along with that. But I've said enough.
Well, maybe a way to deal with that would be the way that it's similar to when you have a liquor license. One of the things that the SLA can look at and take into consideration is whether or not the applicant is complying with other relevant laws. So it's not just strictly the SLA's laws, but everyone else's. So if you are the operator of, you know, you're taking advantage of, and you've got a license under the open restaurants, whatever that's going to look like, and you are committing all these other infractions, maybe we can write into the legislation that that's something that can be taken account of when we're looking at whether or not to renew this person's license. I will say, however, their license is going to be clean if there's no enforcement. Okay, I, as a member of the public, am going to just speak. This is, you know, taking off my chair hat because I live in the neighborhood. We're talking about, you know, we keep saying bad actors. This isn't the effects that are being felt by, I will tell you, the residents in the neighborhood which surround, remember, in our district, and that's all I can really speak about, is that we have, you know, for the most part, our restaurants lie in a zoning district where you have a commercial overlay, which means that you have residences on top, immediately behind, and surrounding. So in our part of the city, you necessarily have a residence next to every single restaurant. And when, you know, you've just got all the restaurants going, just, you know, per force, you've got noise, you've got clanking, you've got voices, you've got music, you've got people walking around, you've got people getting tipsy, which is great, but they're milling around onto the side streets, relieving themselves in people's driveways. We're hearing more and more of this. There's more disruption and drunken, disorderly people, you know, and the bottom line is our police department is not responding. They don't have the resources. They're not responding to quality of life issues. You know, noise is DEP. Well, they call them up, you get a 311 call. They say, well, we can send someone out there at 3 o'clock in the morning tomorrow to come out with, you know, a noise meter and see if your problem is, you know, still going on. Come on. People who live in the real world are not going to, you know, who have to go to work the next day are not, that ticket's never going to issue because the amount of work you're putting on the public just to get that ticket to issue and the amount of diligence, people just want to live their lives. That's not going to happen, you know. So again, you know, and I speak to Doris's points, Steve's points, but, you know, you're asking us to vote on something that you're packaging strictly as a zoning question, and it's not. Right. It's just not. And you're not even giving us, how can we in good conscience say, okay, I'm going to vote in favor of this and not know what the impact will be? For example, what about the restaurants that we're helping? Is it going to be that the license fees for them to even have these things are so high that, you're really not, in fact, helping them. I mean, what are we giving them? Are we giving away ice in the wintertime? Are we saying to them, hey, yeah, you can use the street, but by the way, the fine for this is going to be insane. I mean, so there are too many moving parts here and no information. You're saying to us, hey, do me a favor, vote, give us your recommendation on canning the whole new system, voting in a new system, but we can't really tell you what that
is. The new system.
What is it? And I don't envy your position. I know you don't have the facts, but if you want feedback, this is the feedback you're going to get with what you've given us. Guys, Kate, I've seen you before. I love you. You're great. Leroy, love you to death. I'm sorry. Like, help me help you, And please, I'm using this forum right now because I'm on YouTube. Can someone in this city, our elected officials, whoever it is, Department of City Planning, slow down this process and please give it the right amount of time to get it right. Just get it right. Don't get it wrong and enact legislation and try to fix the problems later on. Everybody knows that legislation trails the problem. Get ahead of it, please, please. I'm done.
Okay, I just want to piggyback on add a bugaboo at our Democratic candidate for mayor supports the repeal of the Cabaret Laws, as do other elected officials. So what happens is if we have these outdoor structures and they decide to devote half of it to dancing, what does that do to the quality of life in our community? And how are you addressing this? Because I think there are so many tangential issues that are not being addressed that you're hearing from us tonight.
So you're saying, and Doris's point is it ties into the zoning. Do we have dancing in the outdoor structures now? Like, so you've got a club on the street, right? So if you can dance in a restaurant,
why can't I dance in the
dancing, there's music. Very few people dance sober, let's face it.
Right.
What happens, right? And so this does tie into the zoning.
Yes.
Hey, Doris, at this point, I think we've heard everybody's opinion. Are we looking to have a vote here?
Well, no, we're not. This is an informational meeting only. We're meeting again on the 14th to torture ourselves again.
To really look at the zoning text and make a formal recommendation.
And to get more information. You'll be getting more information packages in the next week or two, and we're going to meet again on the 14th to vote.
To issue a recommendation. Also, Doris, Amanda's antenna's been very patient with her hand up. And I think part of that outreach will include outreach and surveys to businesses. Dean had made, I think that was a good suggestion.
Comment, Dean.
So I know Amanda's, you've had your hand raised.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I can't have my camera on. My bandwidth is a little low. So I've been listening to everything that you're saying, and I just a couple of things from the perspective of someone who works with restaurants, retail, all manner of commercial industries here on Fifth Avenue. So I would just like to say, yes, it was a lifeline to be able to do this during COVID, and restaurants and others are still grappling with lack of foot traffic and sales. So it is appreciated, but the way that it was rushed made it very difficult. And if we're talking about permanency, I need to say that, the rules and regulations need to be very clear, and they all need to be agreed upon, and something that when it comes out, that the folks that are participating can do so appropriately and properly and make sure that it's good for not only their business, but for their neighbors. And they've put up structures, they've taken down structures, they get different rules. And that just needs to be dealt with before anything becomes permanent. The other thing I would like to say, and I've heard a lot of this here, is enforcement. It is not equal. It is completely ad hoc. When we put these structures out, you had everyone and their brother coming out, including TLC. And I am not sure that I understand what enforcement would look like when this is a permanent program, and that needs to be clear. The last thing I'd really like to say, because I have heard a lot about other industries besides restaurants, is that we do have open retail that hasn't been as successful or as talked about as the open restaurant program. And it makes me wonder, is this idea of permanency also going to extend to the open retail program? So I'd really like to, just kind of go on record as saying that all these things need to be considered. And I know that my merchants are trying really hard to do the right thing, and they need to know what the right thing is. And that is, again, about rules and regulations and understanding enforcement. So, I just wanted to throw a little something in there, having talked to all these businesses many times. So I would appreciate any kind of answer on that.
Thanks, Amanda. First I wanted to respond to the part on open storefronts. And that goes back to what a few other people were saying of trying to help businesses other than restaurants who want to be outside during COVID and have their business do that. So that is a program that we have had for businesses to do that on the sidewalk, similar to sidewalk cafes, but for stores. And yes, Amanda, like you were saying, it hasn't been very popular. We put it out there, we put open restaurants out there, we got a ton of interest and activity and applications and usage out of open restaurants, and we have not had that with open storefronts. So that, as far as I know, we're not looking at a more permanent, robust version of it based on that.
Would that change now that these other structures might become permanent? And is that an option, considering that they may be blocked or they may have issues now? I mean, is that something that can go back and look at? Because they may not have done it thinking this was temporary, but certainly now, if these other structures are permanent, they may feel differently about it.
Are you saying if stores would want to participate in the open storefronts program, if they know that it won't be there forever?
Well, no, I guess what I'm saying is that if there's now going to be a permanency to the open restaurants program, and that they are feeling, as some have said, blocked, or that it is impeding their business, they may feel differently about wanting to participate in an open retail program. So I think that's partly why you haven't seen so many of the retail doing it. Also, it wasn't as clear, and it wasn't really put out with as much, fervor, if you will. So if this program is becoming permanent, and we think we're going to see a lot of cafes out on the streets and structures in that you may find that retail now really does need some way to participate. And then how does that all balance again with sidewalk usage?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's just because of that, the lack of use or enthusiasm for the program so far, we haven't really seen that there would be a change with that. I can look into it more. I can talk to folks about that, but it just hasn't been much of a strong factor. But it's an interesting question.
I would say part of it is because they don't have as strong a lobbying group as the hospitality industry does. To be cynical.
I don't know. I don't know.
I just want to say, excuse me, I do have to go. Okay. We're not voting tonight, right?
No, that's why we broke it up into 2 meetings.
Okay, then Joe, I'll call you tomorrow to find out what else happens now. I don't suspect we'll be going on much longer anyway.
No, I don't think so. I think we're all kind of tapped out.
And you can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, I think Kate, did you want to say something?
Just really quickly, Doris's question about the cabaret laws. To be totally honest, I know nothing about the cabaret laws, but the zoning does break down eating and drinking establishments into categories, whether or not they have dancing. So I can send you that section of the zoning as well. It says where those establishments with dancing specifically are allowed versus eating and drinking establishments with no dancing. Again, I know zero about the cabaret law, so I don't know if changing them would change that, but that's how dancing fits into restaurants today.
And also those locations applying to these programs will not be allowed to have amplified sound.
But they already do.
But they're not supposed to.
Oh, I would love to share.
That, well, me and Joe has had this conversation many a
Yes.
time.
I
You're
could-
not supposed to have amplified sound outside, and that's under the auspices of the NYPD without a permit. And the NYPD are not giving out permits for restaurants to have amplified sound on a daily basis.
Okay, so if the Department of Transportation
Yes.
goes out and sees amplified sound, is there a violation that can be issued by DOT?
But right now, no.
No. So I know there are many members, if you'd like to see, I have the video clip of what some neighbors deal with that the Police and Public Safety Committee have, and what these neighbors continue to deal with. You know, I could show it probably at the next meeting for you to see what it looks like.
I do have a question with regard to.
You send it to DOT and DCP.
I do have a question with regard to amplified sound. So does that include televisions that are mounted on the exterior of premises? Because we're getting a lot of that too. So
Yes.
the establishment will mount a television on the
Yes.
outside in order to provide
Yes.
their people.
Mhm.
So, and what about located within these structures? You know, are they able to put up, you know, televisions and, I mean, can they do it as long as they're quiet or, you know?
Any amplified sound, a television amplifies the sound, is not allowed.
Okay.
But Joe has shown me the videos many a time. And
I
we've
know.
seen it. So,
I know.
No, I mean, so CB10, just to have some fun facts really quick. Pre-pandemic, eating and drinking establishments, 217 noise complaints. Post-pandemic, March 2020 through July of 2021, 1,390 noise complaints in District 10. And about more than 200 were at one establishment.
There's still a lot at all the others.
Yeah. I mean, the top five have no less than 77. 213, 109, 101, 79, and 77 noise complaints. And for those residents who live there, I mean, I've had residents crying at my desk, just crying at my desk, with little babies who can't sleep, with young children who can't do homework. I mean, it is unbelievable to me to think that we can have a permitted system in New York City in the public right of way that cannot provide relief for residents. I just don't understand.
It
As a
can
government,
provide public safety for the residents of their community.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you all.
thank you
And,
for allowing us to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate all the comments. I have pages of, I should have used a bigger piece of paper instead of Post-its, but I have notes and a list of things to follow up with. If there are more questions that come up or.
We'll certainly send them out.
Yes,
Thank you.
And I also added,
Thank you all for your input and observations. What we see and common sense is so much of what dictates what should happen. Thank you all.
And I also added into the chat, and we can send separately the link, which you can send out to others if they want to provide separate public feedback.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night,
everybody.